Did you know that 1 in 6 people experience neuroplastic pain in their life? Neuroplastic pain, TMS or mind-body syndrome, includes a number of symptoms and conditions, including chronic back and neck pain, headaches, abdominal and pelvic pain, fibromyalgia, and IBS, just to name a few. What I found so fascinating when I first started learning about TMS was that some personality types predispose people to have TMS. I'm going to go through some of these personality types today in more detail, but the most common personality types that are identified as being predisposed to TMS include perfectionism, people-pleasing, the need to be liked by others, over-responsibility, staying quiet when you're upset, angry, hurt, and particularly repressing anger, high expectations for yourself, and that might be in your work, as a parent, a spouse, a sibling, being hard on yourself, a tendency towards anxiety and worry, and weak boundaries. Something else that can predispose people to having TMS or mind-body syndrome is adverse childhood events known as ACEs. It's predicted that about 72% of children here in Australia have ACEs, and it's also estimated that about half of the people who experience mind-body syndrome also had experienced at least one ACE in their life. The generally agreed ACEs include childhood physical, sexual and emotional abuse, physical neglect and emotional neglect, exposure to family violence, substance abuse, parental mental illness, parental separation or divorce, and parental incarceration. The long-term impacts of ACEs can include low self-esteem and a tendency to repress negative emotions, including guilt, shame, fear, and anger. People who've experienced ACEs are also more likely to have a tendency towards the characteristics that also predispose people to TMS, including people-pleasing and avoidance. It's most likely that developing these traits was a way for children to manage and adapt to the experiences they were having when they experienced the ACEs. I want to go through some of the really key traits now that predispose people to TMS, and we might start with perfectionism. So perfectionism is sometimes misunderstood as people needing to be perfect at everything. However, it is actually more about being perfect at the things that matter most to people. In the case of TMS, health and being well and being able to do what they want to do in life and be there for other people, etc. And also at the times that matter. So people with perfectionism, many of us will know, have fear of making a mistake, often take a long time to do things, and in extreme cases can completely avoid activities and things that are expected of them because they don't want to mess up, they don't want to make a mistake, so they just do nothing. And these traits can lead to an additional layer of issues with neuroplastic pain because sometimes there is a tendency towards being able to heal this perfectly. And I think people who tend towards perfectionism and also have neuroplastic pain, it's really important for them to realise their tendency to do this, and that is an important part of healing. And whilst we know things like educating ourselves around TMS and journaling and doing all the things is really important, I think it's also important to bring a sense of balance to that and know when there is a tendency towards having to do everything perfectly. Perhaps a better approach for people who are experiencing neuroplastic pain and have a tendency towards perfectionism is a more mindful approach. Things like when your mind is racing, noticing what your thoughts are doing. So being a perfectionist, your thoughts might be saying, you're not doing this right, you should be doing more, why can't you fix this? And in a labeling sense, you notice those thoughts and you might say something like, there's the thought that I'm not doing this right. There's the thought that I should be able to fix this. You're noticing these thoughts as just thoughts, and in doing that, they lose their power. Another thing that I like to do when I'm being a bit perfectionistic about my pain and wanting to journal and wanting to read and wanting to do is just to stop a little bit. It's still a doing exercise, but it's more of a being exercise, which is when you have mild to moderate pain, to take some time to do some somatic tracking. And I have a somatic tracking track that you can access. I will put the link in the description, but I think it's just a nice thing to be rather than do. And also just other mindfulness activities, just being in nature, taking some time to look around and notice our environments. What can we see? What can we hear? What can we feel? Just bringing ourselves back to being rather than needing to do, which can be a tendency for people who tend towards perfectionism. The next personality trait that I'd like to talk about is one that I know well, which is people pleasing. In days gone by, when I wasn't so aware of my own personality and what motivated me, I thought that people pleasing made me a good friend, a great colleague, and someone who was just easygoing, happy to go with the flow and do what pleased the crowd. However, this was driven by fear. Fear of being judged, fear of being left out, fear of being rejected, fear of conflict. So yes, whilst I might have been easygoing, I wasn't easygoing really because I didn't care. I was easygoing because I was trying to keep the peace. Anita Mujani, a speaker and author of the book Dying to Be Me, often speaks about people pleasing. She explains that people pleasing is driven by seeking approval from others, and when we connect with others and try and keep them happy, we're in turn disconnecting from ourselves and suppressing our own needs, which to me sounds a lot like TMS. Mujani suggests that we do more of the following: embrace our own authenticity, prioritize self-love, and live by our own inner values. I really love these messages, and as a people pleaser myself and someone who still has a tendency towards it, these are really key reminders for me when I get into that mode, remembering to ask myself, what do I really want? And what is motivating me to make certain decisions or say certain things or not say certain things? They're really good reminders just to come back to yourself and just check in. If you tend towards people pleasing, maybe make a note of those 3 suggestions and just check yourself when you think you might be people pleasing and not putting your own needs and desires first. I'd like to touch on over-responsibility now. Over-responsibility is when people have a tendency to want to fix other people's problems and become very fixated on other people's problems and how they can help or change things for the better, and they often make other people's problems their problem. However, like some of the other things we've spoken about, over-responsibility is also driven by something within ourselves. And in this case, it's usually driven by the person's own anxiety, their need to seek control, and to protect their relationships. However, over-responsibility can also predispose people to pain because, I guess, again, they're focusing on the external, they're focusing on other people, whereas perhaps they should be focusing on themselves and their emotions and their thoughts and their feelings. Lastly, I wanted to touch on avoidance. While avoidance isn't always described as a personality trait, it can be more of a behaviour. I think it's a really key aspect of TMS, and often TMS is described as an avoidance mechanism, literally a distraction that our mind creates to take us away from processing our emotions or thinking thoughts that we think are unacceptable. There's a quote that I like from, I think it's Steve O who says it, which is, life goes on, emotions buried alive. And that's classic avoidance, isn't it? Of just like, it's fine, if something comes up, we feel it in our body and we just tell ourselves, it's fine, it's okay, I can deal with it, I'll just get over it, I'm not giving this attention, and if I don't give it attention, it'll move on. And part of us feels okay about that. However, we're obviously stuffing down emotions, pushing thoughts away, and they will eventually catch up with us. So for people experiencing TMS or neuroplastic pain, I would encourage you to notice, again, just notice where you're avoiding, what thoughts you think are unacceptable and you're trying to push away, what emotions might come up and you decide that you're not going to deal with them now and perhaps you don't deal with them later. Just really noticing and acknowledging and recognizing what is happening there. And I think that's the first step to be able to process them and work through them. No matter what strategy you're using, it might be journaling, it might be other ways to process pain, but I think the recognizing and knowing that we're doing it is the first step to being able to make these changes. So you might ask, then is the key to healing TMS to change our personality types? And no, it's not. We don't need to change our personalities. There's some really lovely things about being kind and pleasing and amicable. It can make us great partners, colleagues, friends, siblings. However, it's really important to be aware of when we're in these personality traits and recognize times when perhaps the way we're behaving and the actions we're taking, the decisions we're making are not helpful for us. So some ways that you might do this include recognizing when you are not expressing your emotions truthfully, noticing when you stuff down emotions and perhaps say, I'll deal with that later, not now, but you don't come back and deal with them, or if you're just completely pushing them away. Noticing when we're pretending when we're fine, we're telling other people that we're fine when we're not. Also when we're working too hard and taking more responsibility than is healthy and good for us. So here's just a quick recap on some of my favourite strategies when it comes to managing our personality types and neuroplastic pain. Firstly, as I've said a few times, it's noticing and labelling. Noticing our thoughts that we find unacceptable or unhelpful, and just noticing them, labelling them. By noticing our thoughts, they become just thoughts, just pictures in our mind, not something we have to respond to, react to, but something that we can just notice and go, that's interesting. There's that thought. And it could be there's that thought again, because our thoughts tend to be repetitive and we can continue doing it. There's that thought again, and that's okay. Of course, somatic tracking, and like I mentioned earlier, I have a link to a somatic tracking track on my YouTube. I will link to that in the description. And also, of course, journaling when it feels right, not because it's something that you must do every day or you must do a certain amount of time, not something you're doing from a place of perfectionism and needing to fix everything, but from a place where it gives us the opportunity to process our emotions and actually start to feel better. Some of my favourite journal prompts include the following. What negative, judgmental, or fearful thoughts have I had? What comments, situations, or ideas have I reacted to? How did I feel in the moment? What are the attached or underlying emotions? Often for me, it's fear, anger, frustration, feeling hopeless, useless, but that we all have our different tendencies towards different underlying emotions. Did this situation trigger any of my personality traits? And this is where we can look at what we've talked about today. Was I triggered by my perfectionism, my people pleasing? Did I do one of those things? And that's okay. It's just recognizing it, and that's okay. And that's why we journal. And a really key part of journaling that I find is doing some kind of self-care or self-compassion exercise at the end of our journaling. Just taking a moment to recognize the good work we've done. And for me, that might be just putting my hand over my heart for a moment, just taking a few breaths. It might be some gentle tapping, which I find really soothing. Just taking a moment before you get up and do the next thing. It might be just taking a few deep belly breaths. Just a moment to ground and center yourself and congratulate yourself for a good job done. So thank you for listening today. I hope you got something out of this, and I'll see you again soon.